Right. So that's what structural violence is. It is the machinery of oppression, how a terrible system is created for the benefit of the powerful.
Yeah, and then reinforced.
And then reinforced time after time after time.
Yeah.
And
by all the participants in it.
By the participants, yeah.
That's the important thing, I think.
Which is a Foucauldian kind of piece of it, in that,
I would go there.
Yep. Yeah. so it's like it's the idea that if you want people to continue on a terrible system, you have to convince them to police themselves, yes, and then police other people in the system. Mm-hmm. So when you're talking about like structural violence in terms of slavery, you would and like this kind of goes back to the creation of the concept of race in the first. Now, like, there's always been tribalism. There's, of course, always been stereotypes and bigotry for people who are not like you.
Yeah.
That's always been a thing as far as we know we were humans. But the concept of race is only a few hundred years old.
Right.
And that really begins during Bacon's Rebellion, is the aftermath of Bacon's Rebellion, which, if you don't know, was a moment when slaves, indentured servants, black freedmen, and, like, other poor whites, even who were free, rose up against the British elite in Jamestown in the 1660s and basically burned Jamestown to the ground, drove the elite out.
Yeah, basically took everything from the armory and just like went ham.
Right, and they successfully threw them out, so then, like, the mayor and a couple of other elites escape. They go up to Maryland and bring back a British army of several thousand and retake Jamestown. Mm-hmm. But now they have a problem, because now the poor of all different colors and backgrounds, and there were a number of free blacks who actually had voting rights because they held land, and some of them were traders and merchants. Mm-hmm. So, like, it wasn't like inherently at that time, if you were black, you were a slave. After Bacon's Rebellion, that begins to change. Yeah. And by the 1670s and the 1680s, what you're getting is a whole bunch of new laws on the books. Anti-miscegenation laws, which, if you don't know what that means, it means that you can't mix based on the colors of your skin, are some of the first ones to go in. But the real...
That shit lasts until the 1950s.
They're still technically on the books in several states today.
What the fuck?
Yeah, they're still technically not allowed. I mean, they just never removed them.
All right, well, wait for Loving to get overturned, guys. Court case, sorry.
Yeah.
I realized that the name actually sounded... Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so in 1681, you get a series of laws, and the first one is a black person cannot testify against a white person in court. And that's like the first time you start removing the legal rights of people with darker skin. Any infraction essentially makes them into a permanent slave, so that by basically the end of the century, by the time 1700 rolls around, there are no free blacks left in the Americas. Yeah. They are all now slaves. And so, in order to make this system of structural violence worse, they incentivize poor whites to participate in this system by promising them extra privileges and rights, by dangling the whole bootstraps myth in front of them and saying, like, look, don't worry about it. You're poor and white now, but one day you too will have land and power and money, so side with us. Yeah. And so they create all these reinforced structures for poor whites to buy into this system. And because it's like, and if you have to understand too, like, even like Michelle Alexander, the scholar who wrote The New Jim Crow.
Ooh, she's talking at CU Boulder next week.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I just found out today.
Maybe I'll have to go sneak up to CU Boulder next week. So Michelle Alexander is even like, the conditions of poor whites were barely better than the slaves. Like, oh, yeah. They're awful. And so the way that they get them really to buy in is to say, yeah, your conditions suck, but at least you're not dark-skinned. Mm-hmm. And so you create this whole system. And then, in addition to that, in the 18th century, you get a whole series of, like, people like Carlinus Linnaeus who reinforce the concept of race through new scientific techniques by classifying the races. Oh, God. You get the rise...
Yeah, it's too.
Yeah. Yeah, Linnaeus is really important for like the history of biology, but he's also a real bastard.
Oh yeah,
So
one of the worst to ever do it.
yeah, so him and a whole bunch of other scholars start to create these ideas. Then you start to get eugenics popping up, and like there was always a concept of the purity of the blood, but then it gets kind of enshrined in terms of like by the 19th century, it starts being about mental illness. Like there's a physical type for mental illness or criminality. You know, if you're a black person, you're literally genetically inferior now. There's all these kinds of pseudoscience justifications. So that gets us up to this period of like the 1830s. That's all of the kind of things that are really going on here is you have this really deeply entrenched system of structural violence that structural violence erases and controls history. So people they didn't know about the black freedmen or all of these, you know, free blacks who had voting power or land rights or any of that.
Yeah, and if you think like laws getting overturned and changed to make society more conservative and punitive is a new thing, it's definitely fucking not.
No. Right. So you erase and control history, and then you create all kinds of hidden avenues of control that are covert, right?
Mhm.
And like, even though he didn't realize it, George Orwell is essentially talking about systems of structural violence in 1984 and
Yeah.
how you get to this sort of thing. So,
Absolutely.
and if you haven't seen it, watch our first episode on 1984.